Shift over to the wonderful state of Kansas, and we're going to welcome, that's right, and we're going to welcome the Honorable Tim Huelskamp to the stage. Congressman Huelskamp represents the 1st District of Kansas in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's now serving in his 2nd term. Tim has become a leading conservative voice on the most pressing issues of the day, including America's fiscal challenges. Please welcome him to the stage, Congressman Huelskamp. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It sounds like we got a few Kansans here. Is that true? Okay, very good. Very good. Pleasure to join you today, and I am just pleased to be here. But I'll admit up front, there are probably a few folks that won't like what I have to say. And a few reporters caught me. I said, well, come on in if you'd like to hear what I have to say. And they usually get something to report here. So I spent a little bit of time in the last couple years as a freshman visiting with whether it be Sean or Mark Levin or numerous things. But I got 11-year-olds, tell you, he's very political. And I called him one night and I said, you know, I'm going to be on Sean Hannity tonight. And I thought he'd be really, really excited. And his name is Ethan, and he'd tell over the phone, yeah, Dad, sure, big thing. I said, no, it really is. We listen to him all the time, remember? And finally I said, okay, son, you're not impressed. Limbaugh doesn't have guests. I've been on other shows. Now tell me, what would it take to impress you with where you'd see your dad? He said, if I see you on ESPN, I'll be impressed. So I probably won't make that till they get a talk show, but a pleasure to join you here today, and we're looking back, a year ago, many of us were gathered here with optimism. We're optimistic and hopeful that a conservative or something close to that would be in the White House, and that the ideals that we believe in, whether it be limited government, freedom, and liberty and family, would be reaffirmed by the House and Senate. And of course, that didn't happen. Now we could spend this weekend licking our wounds, as I think most of us did, after the really devastating defeats in November. We can do that, or we can attempt to figure out where we went wrong and prepare for the future. Maybe we lost because technology. Maybe it's demographics. How about failed candidates and campaigns? And maybe it's all of the above. And it's easy to find a scapegoat as we look back, whether it's a foot in the political mouth disease, or the massive organizational and fundraising advantages of the president, whether it's overpaid Republican consultants and pollsters who got it wrong big time, or even a hurricane, or the Republican politicians that cozied up to president just a few days before the election. But at the end of the day, I think it's really about leadership and principle, showing by example, merit, and vision why we are the best guys and gals for the job of saving America. So I guess what I'm saying today is maybe that it's actually about us. Maybe it's the fact that we have let our tactics get ahead of our responsibilities, and definitely ahead of our principles. I think maybe we have focused so much on the end zone of winning an election. I know it's March Madness, but the end zone of winning an election, that we have forgotten about the 100 yards in between. And most importantly, and I think this is very critical, why we are even trying to get there in the first place. And as a result, you look around, I think we have no clear playbook, no clear strategy, and oftentimes really no clear mission. Failed play after failed play is slowly but surely sidelining our colonists. Meanwhile, the progressives are slowly, sometimes quickly, implementing their radical agenda. And this sounds like a speech that I should be giving to my colleagues in the U.S. House, and I'll tell you, I have done that, and the results weren't very pretty. And that's why a fifth-generation farmer like me gets kicked off the Ag Committee, and a proven fiscal conservative who votes the right way, I think, every time, and trying to roll back the government, is purged off the Budget Committee. So I'll tell you, my friends, not even Republican leaders like to be challenged to do the right thing. But the reason I am telling you this is not only that you are the ones who help us get into the end zone on Election Day, but you know what? I believe you are the ones who should actually be calling the plays. And for far too many folks in Washington, I just made a very dangerous statement, a fearful thought that real non-elected Americans, real conservatives, should be deciding the future of the Republican Party and the future of the conservative movement in America. Yes, that's what I'm saying, and that's a pretty dangerous thought in America. One thing that also is said often in Washington is that there are no timeouts. Either you are on offense or you're on defense. And that's partially right. But in dealing with this president, there is no choice to be anything other than on offense. We must be smart, strategic, principled. I'll tell you, those are not mutually exclusive as we move down the field. Obama and the rest of the liberal team are trying every play in the book, not only to keep us from the end zone, but also to keep us from advancing down the field. And President Obama and Harry Reid have made it abundantly clear they do not care what it takes to get that done. They also don't care what it takes because they want back the third amigo. Yes, for the next 2 years, the goal of this president is pretty simple. They want Nancy Pelosi back as Speaker again. And they're willing to sacrifice our fiscal and economic health to do so. And taking a cue from the Senate over the past 4 years on the issue related to the budget, the president someday, this is the latest for any Senate president ever to deliver a budget once he gets it to us. But I guarantee you one thing, it won't pass. It will include tax increases, and it'll spend more money, and it's going to borrow more money. And these budgets, whether coming from the Senate that's doing the same thing or coming from the president, are quite frankly insulting. And worst of all, I really think they're dangerous. Now, speaking of dangerous, let me tell you, President Obama told me and the entire Republican conference that the most dangerous thing we could do to hurt the economy is to move towards a balanced budget. Seriously, the most dangerous thing, those are the words of the president. Seriously, he did say that. But hey, he also said that the White House was closed down to tours because the Secret Service made the decision, not the President of the United States. Yeah, right. Exactly how many Secret Service, Mr. President, do you need to protect the White House from dangerous 5th and 6th graders from all across America? Not very many. But you know what? Conservatives, we have to be the voice of reason and sanity in Washington. We have to throw out the insider playbook that calls for a retreat in the fight against big government. We have to throw out that playbook because one of the most common plays we are told to embrace is to let go of our firm belief in bedrock principles, for example, that family is the core unit of society. Usually that recommendation is made by folks at MSNBC. And by the way, I do appear there occasionally. I take my beating, and my staff takes my beating when the folks start calling in the office. But they deserve to hear the truth, all 6 of them that listen. They deserve to hear the truth. But you know what? We don't hear that just on MSNBC. Thankfully, I guess, but no worries, a Republican U.S. Senator just told us the same thing yesterday. I'll note that's the same U.S. Senator who couldn't deliver his home state in the presidential election. Because somehow these folks believe, and this is what they say, that if we abandon, for example, traditional marriage, that liberals are going to flock to us. You know, if somehow we don't tell them that we're conservatives, they won't find out. And supposedly because it helps us win elections. But this capitulation to the left doesn't just apply to politicians more interested in their future than sticking to conservative principles. I'll give you another example. When it was announced the Supreme Court of the United States was going to take up the Defense of Marriage Act, numerous media outlets called me and others. If you look through the responses, they were hard-pressed to find a single person, other than me and a few others, that would say anything in support of a traditional marriage. The silence was deafening, and to me, very discouraging. And maybe some of you here agree with that approach, but I ask, is that what our belief system is founded upon, winning elections? And don't get me wrong, I'm all for victory. You know, my job depends on it. But at the end of the day, all of us have to answer for the positions we take and the policies we make. And whether it's marriage or debt or taxes or healthcare, we should be guided by what we believe is right, not by what we believe thinks scores political points. But secondarily, for those who believe victory is the ultimate principle, let me point out the most amazing coincidence. Amazing to many in Washington, D.C., that is. For when we don't abandon conservative principles, that's actually when we win elections. Don't believe me? No, ask Scott Walker. Hey, think about Margaret Thatcher. Think about Ronald Reagan. As we move forward, I also want to put you on notice to make sure that you are listening for what you may not hear. Listen very closely to all politicians, including me and those running for office. Listen to see if you hear a defense of marriage. See if you hear a defense of the family, defense of limited constitutional government by the very politicians that won our votes and won our money. And please, and they plea that they will carry conservative principles to Washington, D.C. I'm living proof. Politically, I was attempted to be taken out, but I'm going to stand up for principles, and you will survive. And those convictions, holding to those convictions can be difficult. It's not easy to be kicked off the Budget Committee for consistently voting to reduce the budget, reduce taxes, and reduce overspending, take on Obamacare. But as an aside, I know I speak for all the conservative members of the House that had the same treatment. Thank you. Thank you for standing up. I also thank you for standing with our brave conservative senators last week. Friends of mine like Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, and Rand Paul. Continue to stand with us. We need that. But we, at the end of the day, are proof that doing what is right is what allows us to hold our heads high, to keep our spirits strong, and most importantly, to keep our integrity intact and our principles inviolate. As the coaches of the conservative movement, you're the coaches. Allow me to remind you that you call the plays. You decide the players, not me. You decide the principles that move us in the right direction, and most importantly, to the end zone. You determine those players. Choose people who share and fight for our principles and actually know what direction we are heading and share our conservative goals. I've conducted 160 town hall meetings in the last couple of years. I think that's the best part of my job, talking to real Americans. And I often ask this question, and you think about this as well. I said, do you think the American dream is still alive? Do you think that? I was in a small town, 800 folks, Sublette, Kansas. I asked this. 30 folks showed up at a town hall, which is tremendous numbers for a small town, and come to tell me what they thought. And actually, the economy is pretty good where this is at. Out of 30 people, not a single soul in that room thought the American dream was still alive. No one, except for me. But it's shocking because my colleagues hear the same thing all across the nation. But you know what? I believe it is not too late to restore the American dream, and that is our task, ladies and gentlemen, to restore not only the American dream for our countrymen, but to restore their belief in the American dream. For with a conservative vision, driven by conservative principles, we can save America. I will settle for nothing less, and nor should you. God bless you, and God bless our blessed nation.